Commissioner Downs?
Here.
Commissioner Kerr?
Here.
Commissioner Marks?
Here.
Commissioner Parsley?
Here.
And Chair Grossman.
All right. Begin with the approval of the minutes of July 2nd.
I move to approve the minutes.
Okay. Second?
I'll second.
Okay. There are, I think, unless I'm missing something, that we did not have an update from the Aging in Place Subcommittee.
That's
And also, we did not have an update from the Housing Subcommittee. So, those things need to be removed.
We're still on the agenda, though, so we've kept them on the agenda.
Okay.
it was an action. We did say
Yeah.
we were going to do it.
All right, so then maybe we should say they were tabled? Can we do that, table to the next meeting? I
Sure,
don't want to mislead people to think we had a discussion on something that we didn't.
sure,
Yeah.
okay. Then we need a motion.
Motion to approve.
Yeah, then you need as amended.
Okay, so amendment to add that we're tabling the two, the aging in place and housing reports.
We're tabled to
Subcommittee
September, yeah.
reports.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Can I ask a question? Since I was absent, am I supposed to not vote on this?
You can abstain. Legally, you can vote, but probably should abstain. It's sort of been the tradition, yeah.
The tradition is to abstain?
Yeah.
That's fine.
All right. Seeing that there's no public, we won't have any public comment. So announcements from staff and commission members. Isabel, do you have an announcement?
Just wanted to let the commissioner know about American Red Cross shelter simulation training happening at the Senior Center on October 5th. It's a half-day training by the American Red Cross, and it provides an opportunity to participants to practice what they've learned in the shelter fundamentals courses. So I think some of you may have gone to that first class, but regardless, if you'd like to acquire some skills on how to open a shelter in case of an emergency, the class is happening on October 5th. It's a Saturday from 9 to 1, and lunch and refreshments will be provided.
And I should say from prior experience that if you don't have that training, no matter what training you do have, the Red Cross won't allow you to do anything. You have to have their training. All right. I think most of us were there, but I just wanted, for the record, to mention the meeting on the Saha development project on Cleveland, which a couple of factors that I think are really important. One is that it will be entirely affordable, that is within 20 to 60% of average mean income for the area. And they indicated that 20 to 30% will be very low, which is very good. Very few projects are that high. And the affordability, if you were to think in terms of 3 people, well, let me just put it this way: the studio apartment, the monthly rent would be between $434 if there's 1 person, and $1305 if there were 5 people in the studio, though I don't know. And then a 3-bedroom for 1 person is $644, but you can't rent a 3-bedroom if you're 1 person. And for 5 people is $1933. So those look pretty good. The specific would be also dependent on your income. And other people were there. Does anybody else want to comment?
I thought it was really well done. It was really informative, and it looks like a very, very good project. So hopefully with some tweaking, we can get everybody on board, and it'll be a good project for the city.
Isabel, do you have any idea? I meant to look at the housing element, and I didn't. How many units Albany is supposed to build this year?
From the top of my head, I don't know.
Don't
No.
know. Because I'm wondering if this will take care of our requirements.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't.
Doesn't, not much more.
Well, there's certain, median income, like they do it by income.
Right.
And I don't remember offhand.
Complicated,
But yeah, but
yeah.
it's much more.
Okay.
We're not anywhere near what the state has said that we should have
Okay,
in any of the, except for the upper income.
right.
We didn't really have to produce any, but even when they built Belmont Village, they said that those rents were too high to count as part of our
Yes.
share of affordable housing.
Right, a lost opportunity there. Okay, any other announcements? Public comment? I know we went past that, but we'll come back. Do you have anything you want to say that's not on the agenda? Nope? Okay, thank you. Then let's move to the agenda. Sid will not be here tonight, but we're going to have a rent review quarterly update. Isabel?
Yes, so you should have at your, in front of you, the, some information on rent review that was prepared by Sid, and unfortunately cannot be here tonight. But you'll see on the second page that we now have some new outreach material for the rent review program. And this was also based on the feedback received from the commission at when we presented the previous quarterly report, that outreach materials needed to also be available and kind of seek out, tenants' interest in the rent review program, since landlords have gotten information via their business license. So basically, just in general, you'll see that the third page is the flyer that is, no, not the third page. Yes, third page is the flyer that's been created, and it's been, we're posting it at all city facilities. Flyers are available, and we continue to do outreach in different ways. We did the city mailer when the ordinance first came into effect. We're also, information is on the city website, is kept up to date. We've done some info on, included info in the senior center newsletter, the city e-news, the Recreation Department activity guide, and of course, after the ordinance came into effect, we did the workshops and presentations. But the flyer that you have in your packet is really the most recent new outreach material that we have. And then as far as rent review engagement, you'll see on the fourth page, what Sid has gotten some calls and has been conversing with landlords and tenants, and you can see that he's had 14 conversations with landlords, 24 with tenants, and others means that either the person he talked to did not mention whether or not they were a tenant and landlord, but called just for information. The general topics are from landlords are a lot of, the availability of, they're noticing requirements for the availability of rent review, threshold amount that triggers the rent review ordinance, and then a little bit more information. They want information on conciliation and mediation processes. And then for tenants, it's mostly tenants calling who want information on their rights. And usually Sid will give them a brief introduction, but when it goes into more details, then refers them to Echo Housing, who is also the administrator of the rent review program for the city of Albany. Which now takes me to the last page, and you'll see that since the beginning of the rent review ordinance, there's been, Echo Housing has handled 4 requests. 2 of them were resolved before conciliation. 1 went through the process of mediation, and one is pending. So an application was received in July, and the mediation's been scheduled for September. So that's the report I have right now. I'm happy to answer some questions if you have any.
I'm wondering, when Sid talks to people, is it possible for him to ask them, and this would be purely voluntary, what percentage of increase they're faced with?
They have to tell.
Well, if they fill out the rent review request form, we get that information.
Right, well, but if we-
But it's not necessarily also rent increases. The people will call for different issues, not necessarily rent increases. But the ones that do fill out the rent review request, form, then we get that
So
information.
we have that data. It would be interesting to know what kinds of percentages people are being asked.
Right, but as you can see, there hasn't been that many, right? There's been
No, but I'm
4.
talking about going forward.
Yeah. Well, I think once we get a full year, we'll be able to give you, a full year's report of what were the cases and the rent increases. We can give you that information, sure.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let's
Oh,
finish and
okay.
we're going to, yeah.
The last report Sid gave did show the amounts, and what was upsetting to me was there was one landlord that had raised on 2 different apartments the rent 9%. Now, if you raise it 10%, you have to give 60-day notice. 9%, it's only 30, and so I thought that was really chicken shit. That we have a landlord in Albany that was doing, I don't know. But that's why we have the program, and Sid's on it.
Yeah, and that's right. The last report had the information, but there hasn't been no new information since then. So, except for the pending application, which we don't have a resolution for just yet.
It looks very much like the state, by the way, is going to pass rent control statewide at 5% plus the cost of living.
Yeah.
So, and the cost of living these days doesn't go up that much.
I had a couple questions.
Sure, go ahead.
I don't know, are we going to have public comment? or-
Well, ask your
Okay,
question.
okay. So, thank you for the report in Sid's absence. I just had 2 questions on whether this rent review outreach materials were presented at the recent neighborhood services outreach to the Gateview community. Do you know if he brought any of that with him, or? I know that was a big project.
Yes, I'm not sure if they were, but it was August 24th, so
Maybe not.
maybe not. I don't know. I'd have to find out from him.
And then secondarily, will this be available?
Yeah, actually, Anne Marie was there.
Oh, okay. Okay, good, that's great to hear. And then additionally, will this be available at the stroll? I mean, is that an outreach revenue location that we can use?
Well, the city will have a booth at the stroll, and we could certainly make the flyers available. We're trying to make it a not so paper, handing out papers at the event, because what ends up happening, they end up in the trash or on the sidewalk and stuff. So we're trying to limit the paper information to either little postcards and not distributing big flyers. So if we have any time to create some sort of postcard for the stroll, then possibly we could do that. But that's on Sunday, so not sure if we'll get to it.
It would be a missed opportunity
Yeah.
if there isn't information about the rent review, even
yeah.
though we don't have
And then finally, just kind of tailing off of Bart's comment about potential changes in state law, it'll be interesting to see how we position ourselves should rent control become a state law in terms of this program specifically, and how we will or will not need to support that. There's a lot of potential change,
Yes.
which I think we should all keep in the back of our minds.
Yes.
citizen participation, resident participation.
Public comment.
Thank you. The mind is not working quite right. Never does right after dinner. Okay. So any public comment? No. So we will move on then. Albany Cares quarterly update.
Anne-Marie's here, the director of the Albany Cares program, and she'll provide you with an update. I do have a few copies of what Anne-Marie's going to go over, and it's also on the screen.
Hello, all. I know this is a little outdated information now because this is April through June that I'm presenting to you now. So it's a little old already. But in front of you, well, on the first page, I have information about the number of contacts and then the unduplicated contacts. And on the right, I put the numbers that were from the first report, the first 3 months that I did some months ago, so that you have that for comparison. So in terms of number of contacts, we had 86 drop-in contacts coming into our drop-in center. Not 86 different people, but 86 times that people came in and dropped in on our Wednesday, Friday hours. And then we had a lot of other contacts in the form of emails, phone calls, and sometimes other face-to-face contacts, sometimes at the Albany Senior Center, or over at the library, and some other places where we've been doing some outreach. So together, that's 184 contacts, which is a full 50% over the last report, which was 127 total contacts. So a big increase. Same number of drop-in days, 26 drop-in days. So we definitely have been, the word's been getting out more, and we've become more popular. And then of all of those contacts, it comes out to, when I look at unduplicated, everyone who came in at least once or contacted us at least once over those 3 months, it was 47 people who came in at least once, and an additional 33 people who contacted us in some other way but didn't come in, for a total of 80, as compared to a total of 58 in the last report. 2 of those 80 were people who were contacting us in a professional capacity or coming in, as a service provider or a volunteer with another agency. So that brings us to 78, what I refer to as clients total for that period. And then the next page, we break down the demographics for those 78 people. I did change, it's not great for comparing to the old report, so I didn't do that here. And we made some changes in how the age ranges, et cetera. But you can see that we still have a large number of people over the age of 62. So we're still seeing a lot of seniors, and more women than men. And in terms of ethnicity, I think, there's a fairly nice diversity. Still, a majority are European American, but we have been seeing, quite a lot of every other ethnicity, really. And we're getting better now at tracking those numbers, having the clients sometimes fill in this information themselves, which is something that I think Julie Winkelstein had suggested at the last meeting. So I think in the next report, we will have fewer unknowns for these demographics and more information. City of residence is by far a majority living in Albany. We do still see a number of folks in Berkeley and some folks, in the other neighboring communities, and we don't get residents, or we weren't getting residents on everybody. But again, we're trying to get more of that information. We saw of those 78 folks, 10 of them were homeless, and then 8 we didn't get housing information. And of the 60 who were housed, when we knew, it broke down fairly evenly to renters and owners. So really quite a wide range of people we're seeing coming in. Again, as before, the majority of people are coming in with housing-related issues. It's not always that they're looking for housing. Sometimes they have a landlord-tenant issue, or they want information on how to get repairs made, various things around housing. And sometimes it's a little hard for me to separate whether it's a housing issue or a home care issue, because we have a lot of people coming in around home care needs, and sometimes they come in thinking they may need to move because they can't afford to pay for home care, or they're considering going into some kind of assisted facility and want to talk through the different options. So sometimes there's a little overlap there. We've also been seeing a large number of people around different sorts of financial issues, tax preparation, the parcel tax, which I'm hoping we're going to see a lot more people around that next time it's time for that. Sometimes some debt collection or assistance with paying for utilities, help signing up for some of the different low-income discounts that there are for different utilities, or help with their Social Security or their SSI payments. So we're doing, a real range of different things with folks. And then as our contract, I think, asks for, I've been keeping track of the contacts that we have that are sort of along the lines of emotional support, mental health support, which we do a lot of. Not that many folks have a mental health issue, but that we're doing a lot of helping people think through, talk through some of the issues. Sometimes people come in and they're not even quite sure how to describe the issue, and they have kind of a story to tell, and then we can help them figure out if there is a problem that needs to be solved. And then I have a new way of trying to track the types of assistance we're doing. For some folks, well, there was one person we just were never even able to reach, and then in one case, the only contact we had was to invite someone to come to drop in, rather than trying to talk through an issue on the phone. But we do have some folks who are coming in mainly to talk, maybe get some advice, just for kind of a listening ear. And then we did, beyond that, we gave referrals to 41 people. We made phone calls with or on behalf of people in 21 cases. We did research in 17 instances, and did a lot of follow-up with folks. So we've been contacting people some months later to see if the issue got resolved, if the referrals we gave them ended up resolving the issue for them. And we've had people respond to those calls and come back in some cases because the issue didn't get resolved. And I'm doing a lot of follow-up with people by email and phone afterwards. We got involved, or in most cases it's me getting involved in advocating for people with different issues, whether it's with a debt collection agency, or one woman was being charged for some items that weren't, it was through a phone company. She was being charged for things that really were not her her responsibility. So some different areas where I've gotten involved in that. And then we also help folks filling out applications, in some cases even writing up documents for different, for different issues that are going on where they need help putting things down in writing. We made a lot of referrals to Berkeley Food and Housing in that period, but no referrals that actually followed through with Berkeley Mental Health. And those those referrals tend to work a lot better when the representative from Berkeley Mental Health is there for our drop-in, and then we're able to make much better connections, I think. And then the last page is how people found out about us. Still majority through the senior center, but we're starting to get the word out in other ways. Neighbors and friends, the city website is starting to pay off, I think. We've got a connection now at the library and the rec program, and I think we'll start to see more numbers in the next report coming from there. The Senior Resource Expo was a good way of getting the word out. The Showers program is helpful. And then again, we are getting better, I think, at getting that information from people, whereas here we had a lot of folks, we don't know how they found out about us. And then on the last page, this is mainly a different kind of outreach that we did. We were at the Senior Resource Expo, and quite a few of the volunteers there, talking to different seniors who came through. Sid and I met with the new library manager, and then we were invited to do a presentation to the library staff, and I thought that was really helpful. We met with members of the Albany Community Foundation and applied for a grant, which we got. And we helped to sponsor a mental health first aid class, which was really well attended, and did that with Berkeley Mental Health. And I attended one of the classes, and I presented at both of them a little bit to the folks there. And we've started having regular case conferences with Berkeley Food and Housing Project, which is really, really helpful. And then we had some other outreach by phone, or just some one-on-one meetings. I think we're going to get listed in the next Born to Age magazine. We've had volunteers, one volunteer, Judy, in fact, who went to a memorial service close by on the Greenway and talked to several of the police officers and neighbors about CARES. And another volunteer who went to a Rotary Club meeting and gave out information, and another volunteer who went to the Friends of Albany Seniors meeting. We're still working pretty closely with the social worker at UC Village, and then a few other different agencies. We have an information stand set up now at the library and where you come in from the parking lot that we're trying to keep stocked. It's got 12 different compartments, and we're trying to keep information in there regularly that we think is kind of the most useful to people. The monthly open house listings about affordable housing opportunities, and the monthly meal listings for the senior center, and a few different things like that, the rent review information, and of course, our information. So I think that that's going to probably get the word out a little bit more also. So that was our spring.
Thank you very much.
Yes, my pleasure.
Questions, anyone?
I've got a few. So you had 0 referrals to BMH during that process. does BMH come to Albany Cares? Do they have a worker
No,
that comes?
Marcella is scheduled to come twice a month, the second and the fourth Wednesday of the month, but she's from Argentina, and she has family there, and she is often traveling. So I think there was a 2-month period. It wasn't actually completely during this period, but there are sometimes 2-month periods when she's not around, and we don't see her. And it's unusual that we see a person and ask them if they want to meet with a mental health counselor, and we refer them to Marcella, and they end up going on their own. It doesn't happen.
So you don't
very often.
You don't call the crisis team or anybody.
You know, I've only called the crisis team for real crises.
Yeah.
You know, I could pick up the phone with a person and call Marcella, and we might be able to reach her, and they could talk to Marcella on the phone. But people are fairly averse to talking to a mental health counselor. Whereas if she's there, I can fairly easily introduce people to her.
Yeah,
Or
it's a
sometimes I'll
difference.
go off to take care of something, and I'll ask her to come over, and she'll sit and talk to a person, and then they can maybe make a connection that the person might follow up on and go and meet with her. Yeah, it's much more effective.
And then, since a lot of the things since some of the things are financial, I don't know how the city could get involved in that, but, or I know that several the commissioners volunteer. Have we maybe reached out to a local attorney that could do some work pro bono if there's a situation that requires a higher level of some legal issues, trust writing, things of that nature? I don't know if that's something the city would necessarily want to get involved in, but that on a volunteer level, at least presenting that information, maybe there would be somebody out there willing to do that. I mean, it's pretty clear that from the numbers that it's the over 62 is very nearly or over half the visits. So I think that's we definitely need to do a little bit, continue the outreach with the senior center. I think it's, I'm really glad that you've brought the police department in. I think that's going to be, I think getting the police department on board is it's going to be a big process. And I think it's going to be really, really helpful because typically those are the people, and to some extent, maybe even the fire department. Those are the people that are going to see people in crisis, people that are having issues firsthand. So I think getting them to be involved with the program is going to actually be really, really helpful, and hopefully that continues. I think that was pretty much it. That was it. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. And I also want to just acknowledge the two Albany Cares Program volunteers who are in the audience tonight, along with Margie and I myself, who volunteer there. In looking at these numbers, Anne Marie, it is interesting to kind of look at it in the context of mental health services and possibly unmet needs by seniors. And I wonder if going forward, looking at the numbers of the high percentage of seniors that we're seeing, if we couldn't think about ways to restructure the time that we have from Berkeley Mental Health into some sort of kitchen table support program or something a little different, maybe not even in the same site, maybe more on the senior center side. Anyway, it's just a thought, and it's on reflection of the numbers and on my sense from Brian Parsley's comments and comments from you that we haven't quite really captured the resource of mental health services to the best efficiency that we can.
Right.
So something to think about. And going forward, maybe we can work on ways that we can facilitate changes there.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
I'd like to jump on the mental health issue a little bit too, because I'm a bit disturbed hearing that somebody's been assigned and not showing up. Berkeley Mental Health's not doing us a favor. We're entitled to these services, and if we're not getting them, we ought to speak with the director, because that's part of what their funding is for. And Albany is part of the catchment area for Berkeley Mental Health. So this was a commitment that was made actually when Judy and I were on the commission, and it became very clear that Albany was tremendously underserved, and the director made a commitment to do something about that, and this is sort of the main thing that they were going to do. So if they're not doing it, we really have a problem. We need to do something about that. Isabel is probably the person who's in a position to do that. But you do have a lot of mental health contacts, and it disturbs me that the referrals aren't following through and that they're not doing their job really.
Well, I don't want this to come across in the wrong way. I was given the impression that our contract wants us to track people that we're giving emotional support to, and that could be interpreted loosely.
But you've got a category for that.
The mental health contacts?
No, I mean, you have an emotional support category.
Oh, emotional support advice, yes, that's right. I thought maybe you were referring to the 45 number.
Yeah.
The emotional support and advice, right. Yeah. But 5 is a relatively small number of 78 people.
The 45.
The 45, okay. So that's the mental health contact. I was told we should interpret it in a very loose way as people who are coming in needing some sort of support and to talk through something. Not that they necessarily need to be seeing a counselor or a therapist, or in some cases they are. But, there are people who come in and they just want a referral and it's just about a financial issue and they've got it under control. And then there are a lot of people who come in and they need help even just kind of figuring out what the issue is, and they need to talk it through. And I think, of course, lots of people can benefit from mental health, from therapy and counseling, but I'm not suggesting that 45 of the people who came in should be in mental health treatment. Right?
All right.
Yeah.
One other question. So it looks like there's a fair percentage of repeaters.
Yes, we have people who come back, well, we have a couple of people who come almost every week, week after week. Not that many. I would say one person stands out as coming that often. But we do have folks who come, once or twice a month, for a few months. Yeah.
That could be constructive or it could be problematic, so
Right.
I leave that to you. But.
I haven't found it to be problematic, actually. I think that we're pretty good at prioritizing people who are coming in for the first time. And usually there's enough of us to go around to spend a little time interacting with someone, even if they come in often, and sometimes they end up interacting with other people who are there as clients also, which is nice. It has not been problematic for me at all.
Good.
Yeah.
That's great. Yes.
I don't know if this was on the table in the back. Is this something that she put there for the, it says. it's
No,
like-
this is for the next item, Albany Project Hope.
Oh, okay, all right.
Okay, yep. I don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Any public comment? Yeah, go ahead.
So regarding the mental health person from Berkeley, as long as I've been there, which I think is almost 3 years now, this same person often doesn't show up because she doesn't have a replacement at her work, at the office. And so I think it really does need to be addressed at the higher level about, their structure. Okay. The other thing I wanted to mention was one place we're not advertised is the Albany Activity Guide. And I've asked for this also as long as I've been here. And if we just had like a half-page ad every time, I think that would reach more people, because not everybody is on the e-news. Okay, and regarding the stroll, very disappointed that we don't have a table. And if there's a way we can get flyers there, I don't know whether anybody has time to design a postcard, but I'd be happy to pick up extra flyers at the end if that's the issue. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes.
I just want to second the thought process about having flyers at the stroll, because I was very much addressed the issue that maybe if I could get other volunteers, we could set up our own little table and, without causing too much confusion. So I just want to know that I back Susan and that I think it's a great idea during the stroll, and I'm willing to participate in doing so.
I agree there should be something at the stroll, and I know they still have empty booths or empty spots, because I got an email today saying this, so I don't know if it's too late for somebody to just let Alan Kane know that you want to put a table up and put some flyers, but I know they have empty spots, so. And then I just had a question on the ethnicity. I can't remember what it said. Isabel, can you scroll it so I can see it said ethnicity, I think it was the other way. Yeah, ethnicity, that's the word it used, and gender, actually. So I just had a question. How do you know, both for the gender and for the ethnicity? Thanks.
So on the gender, actually, last time I presented, Julie, you mentioned about the unreliability of us. And we changed the forms, and we are now asking people to fill that part out themselves. Thank you. But this is a little old, what we're looking at here. So as I said, this is April to June. So there's a lot more unknown in the way of people's ethnicity, et cetera, than will be in the next report. So some of this information was still from us, taking guesses at, people's gender, et cetera, and now we are having people fill out that information themselves. Or in some cases, like over the phone, we do ask them.
Anyone else? Anything else? I just, actually, one other thing I wanted to say, I was sort of processing some of the things that people are saying, and the idea of doing something at the senior center in terms of a discussion group, I think that's a good idea, but I think it should be the responsibility of the senior center. One of the things I've been concerned about from the beginning is that the senior center could wind up capturing a lot of the resources of Albany Cares, and the senior center has its own resources. So I think we need to be careful. Of course, people, because of where it is, people know it and it gets referred to easily, and that's good, but there are a lot of other people in Albany who also need to be reached. So I think we have to be careful about, not interpreting the fact that we're getting mostly seniors to mean that seniors are the people who have most of the problems. It's just a matter of who knows.
Right.
Location.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for the excellent work and thanks for the volunteers. Put in a lot of time and effort. Really appreciate that. Okay, let's see. Looking at the minutes, where's the agenda? It's getting close to-
BFHP.
Okay, the Albany Project Hope. So we have a report. You want to lead us in that, Isabel?
Sure. So this is the fourth quarter report, so a full year's report for Albany Project Hope. You'll see that just for that last quarter, there were 21 clients in housing navigation and 7 clients in outreach. And 2 clients were housed. 3 have maintained housing for 6 months, and 3 have maintained housing for a year. And then also I'm happy to report that if you read the narrative, there was a mentioning of a senior client who was in the process of being housed, and since then she has been housed. And BFHP has also housed 2 other households since the writing of this report, a female client with multiple disabilities and a family of 5 that included a disabled child. So, and both those households were housed fairly quickly, considering their needs and the availability of housing within 3 weeks of receiving their case. They were housed. So a lot of progress has been made in the last few months. And then also included as part of the report, you'll see there's the narrative that describes what the BFHP staff has been doing and successes and challenges. And then as part of the attachment, you'll see performance measures, and that's for the entire year. So that gives you an idea of the targets they've met and others that were not. And you also have the BFHP Outreach Service Tracking, which gives you an overview of all the activities, the services they've provided for the year. And then, of course, you have the demographics report. That's not for the full year. That's, of course, for the activity of the last quarter. But I thought that the performance measures provided a pretty good overview of the year, and wanted to make note of that with you. I'm happy to answer any questions you might. Oh, and then the last thing is that they did conduct a survey, a client survey, which was also included as part of your packet. And I also included, I asked them also to provide a copy of the blank survey. So that's what is on the table in the back, and also included in front of you is the survey that was conducted by BFHP to clients. And then there's an overview of the responses also as attached to the report.
Questions?
I just wanted to, I was looking at the narrative, and under successes, she talks about 2 families at the UC, the housing, and they were behind in their rent, I guess, a lot of money. So she worked with the UC Berkeley staff on accepting payment from a third-party agency. So I'm glad to see that that money, that HEAP money, is keeping people housed in Albany. It's really
Yes.
good that we have the money and,
Right, that's prevention,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, it's
Mhm.
great.
So they're also doing prevention activities, and we're able to keep two families housed.
yeah, great.
Here's,
I-
go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Isabel, for the report. I also have a question about HEAP funding, and I don't understand what's HEAP and what's not. So is the HOPE program entirely HEAP funded? And then what HEAP money can be accessed by the HOPE program?
So HEAP started, BFHP started using HEAP as of July 1st. So the prevention money that was used for these two families was actually city general fund money. But the HEAP funding has different categories of funding. So there's prevention, there's housing subsidies, there's a landlord incentive program, there's a flexible housing pool, and
And are we planning to backfill the services of Berkeley Food and Housing and
Well-
the Navigators team with, we're going to do that?
yeah, so basically, as of July 1st, we have one full-time case manager, and we have a half-time case manager. So the half-time case manager is being paid by HEAP funding. Yes.
And is the new position at the Albany Cares program also HEAP funded?
Albany Cares program, no.
No, that's general fund.
Yes.
It
Actually, it's also MHSA funding.
It matters because I realize it's important that we utilize the funds in the HEAP program.
Yes.
And I want us to maximize our utilization of that to the extent that we can.
It's just that HEAP is very regulated.
I understand,
And we are going back and
I'm a creative
forth
thinker.
still. Yes, yeah, we can only be creative so much, especially after the contract's been written.
You don't want to create yourself into a disallowance.
Well, I don't want us to fall into one of those either because we haven't spent the money, yeah.
Anyone else? I have a couple of questions. So there are two sets of demographic data, one for 21 clients and one for 7 clients. What's the difference?
So the 21 clients are clients that are in housing navigation, so they're working currently with the case managers to, at different levels of housing navigation, but basically getting housing ready. And the 7 are people that they've encountered in outreach, so they are not ready to proceed to housing navigation step. They haven't been assessed. Well, they've been assessed to a certain point, but not for housing purposes. They're in outreach and just maintaining a relationship with the case managers and working with them. So there's two sets of them. We have to do it this way because that's the way that it's entered into the system. And that's the best way we found to keep the information as detailed as we need it to be.
So that means that there are 28 people you would identify as clients.
For the fourth quarter, it can change quickly, especially with outreach, but that are actively engaged with the case managers. There is also another group of people that have not been assessed at all, that may that may be encountered at some other time, but just have not engaged and has been assessed at all, have not agreed to
They're not-
provide any
they're not
information.
clients, although they've received some.
Exactly. So there's another
13 of
set.
them.
So 7 and 21 right now for the fourth quarter. I'm sure those numbers, will change again by the time you get the first quarter report for this new fiscal year.
It's not bad, it's just that there's so many different numbers that it's hard to figure out how many people are actually being served. So well, I did want to point out, just as a matter of interest, and on page 18, where it shows individual income, there's not a single person who would be eligible for the low income in the Cleveland project. There's nobody who makes up to 40K. I mean, people could be eligible underneath that, but, but nobody makes even the lowest level of the median income. And it's important for us to realize that we've got a lot of people who don't have any income at all. It's important that we recognize that population and not just see them as low income. They're no income. Or they may have some small benefit. Anything else? Okay, well then, thank you very much. Appreciate that. And we move on to the Inclusivity Subcommittee update. That's you guys. You've done a lot of work.
That's us. I think you're first and I'm second. For the agenda.
So since we last met, it was July, I suppose, Greg and I have met twice and had a few phone conversations. And it's our hope that what we're presenting to you tonight will be approved by the commission to move forward to the council. So that's our goal. We have worked hard to include a lot of public commentary in the last 2 months. I know I've met with a few people. I've talked to a lot of people. I've done quite a bit of personal research in terms of understanding better the policy development cycle. I'm sort of educating myself. It's essentially using the crib notes for AP public policy, which I never took in high school, but I'm trying to learn it. And what I'd like to do is run through about 6 or 8 slides that I prepared and talk to you about the recommendation that Greg and I are putting forth to the full commission for approval tonight. So we're going to talk about inclusivity statements and recommendations, and we're going to talk about the public policy development cycle and how inclusivity is part of that. So we'll go to the next slide. Thanks, Isabel. The definition of inclusivity, as derived from the Oxford Online Dictionary, is the practice or policy of including people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized, such as those who have, and this is just a minor list, have physical or mental disabilities or are members of a minority group. The next slide is about, next slide. This is the steps in the policy cycle. So when the city council gets a report from the staff, what they're getting is a report on what's happened in developing policy or ordinance within the city. The first step in that policy cycle is agenda setting. So the question that we need to ask ourselves when we're talking about agenda setting within the city is who's at the table when the problem to be solved by a policy or an ordinance is identified, and how is information gathered for the agenda setting? So that's the first question that Greg and I want to ask is how do we get this in front of us? Why are we looking at this issue? The second phase in the policy cycle is policy formulation. Who participates in the recommendation? Who, in the staff report that's written, whose idea was this? Where did it come from? Was there research done? Did staff use community coordinating agencies? You know, what goes into the staff report? The third phase is the one that I think most of us who've been to a city council meeting are the most familiar with, and that's the adoption phase. Where is the decision made? That's where the staff report is presented, and the council discusses with public input, very important, the public input, and the decision is made regarding whether there will be a change in an ordinance or the adoption of a policy, et cetera. The next phase, which happens after the adoption or revision, is implementation. How is it brought online and how is the recommendation actualized? And finally, evaluation. Are measures of success used And if so, what is included in those measures? So those are the 5 steps in the policy, and in each of those 5 steps, there is an opportunity to improve inclusivity in our process. This is a broad overview of protected groups. Greg and I have talked quite a bit about, different approaches to to defining groups, depending on which agency you're looking at. The U.S. Census uses one set of groups. University of California uses another set. The city of San Francisco uses another set. So these aren't written in stone. There is no stone on this. But these are what we're suggesting is issues that we want to look at for inclusivity. And important to note is that housing status and economic status are part of this. So housing is partially inclusivity. The next slide. This I put in just because I wanted to make sure you brought your magnifying glass. What this is actually just a cut and paste of what has been done with inclusivity in the city. So it's not like this is a completely blank slate and we're starting to create something. There has been a fair amount of work that's been done, including work at the bottom item is the police department's work. The first couple are mayor statements that relate to being an inclusive and welcoming community. There's a sanctuary city aspect to the prior inclusivity work. So there's a lot of work that's been done, and what we're proposing is really just a more limited and very focused statement. The next slide, please. You've seen this before. This was our initial proposal back in January. It's an objective of an overview, methodology, and the responsible parties. Essentially what we're saying is that we would like each staff report to have a statement of inclusivity in it. There is currently a statement of sustainability, and we thought they rhymed. So we want to include sustainability, inclusivity along with sustainability. Next slide, please. So this is a template. This was Professor Grossman to my left's assignment. Last meeting, Bart suggested that we could create a template. So Greg and I worked on this quite a bit and went back and forth on the phrasing. So the italicized part of the statement is what would be written in by whoever on the city staff is writing a staff report. So it makes it fairly simple to follow along. I won't read it to you because I have examples that will follow, but basically the template includes the 5 steps of the public policy cycle. So we're looking at all the phases. Next one. What we did next, Greg and I, was we took existing they're not public policy statements, but they're staff reports. We took existing staff reports and we created, using the template on the prior slide, a paragraph that would be an example of what a inclusivity statement would look like. So in the case of the HEAP funding, the problem to be solved by this recommendation, this is from March of 2019, March 18th, and I think, Isabel, you wrote this report, so the staff report. What the paragraph would read is, the problem to be solved by this recommendation was identify the point-in-time homeless count from data from 2017, from community reports on unhoused persons to city staff, and from city staff observations and requests for assistance. Possible solutions were identified by city staff in coordination with statewide agencies. The recommendation, if adopted, will include publicly reported outcomes as per the stipulations of the contract, and this recommendation, if adopted, is expected to impact unhoused persons in Albany and the general public. So that's, when we were initially talking about impact statements, we were really just talking about the end point, but on further review, I think Greg and I both agreed that there's more to it than just talking about the end point. The next example, this is the sewer rehabilitation approval and the impact statement for inclusivity. The problem to be solved in this recommendation is completing the EPA requirement under consent decree for sewer rehab. and the contractor is Ranger Pipelines. This statement, or this staff report, I think was written by who wrote this one, do you remember?
Maybe the Public Works engineer?
Public Works Department, yeah.
Director?
Yeah, so as you can see, these impact statements are going to have to be written by a lot of different people with different backgrounds and different experiences, so the template was a good idea, Bart. No other contractors or recommendations for completion of the requirements or consent decree are being considered. If the recommendation, if adopted, will not include publicly reported outcomes. I guess that's unless the sewer leaks, and that would be rather public, and it would be reported. If adopted, it's expected to impact all residents and businesses within the city. If adopted, it will not have any publicly reported outcome measures. And then finally, the third example is, and I'm not going to go through this, you guys can read it yourselves, but this is related to the reserve fund policy. And because this particular policy included regressive taxes, it could potentially impact low-income residents to a greater degree than high-income residents. So it's all of these are examples of a place to stop and think. You know, who is this impacting? What are we doing here? Why are we doing this? Who are we doing it to? And what's the potential outcome? The last couple slides are. This is a recommendation for a motion. The SEJC recommends that council review the information presented in the SEJC Diversity Inclusion Subcommittee and approve recommendations to direct staff to add inclusivity statements to each staff report. And the SEJC requests that council agendize this report on inclusivity. So that's the motion we're looking for tonight. I think there's one more slide, which would be the subcommittee recommendation to SEJC. So this is actually the request for tonight. So we're asking you guys to approve it tonight so we can take it to the council for them to also approve it for direction to staff. And that's it. Yeah.
One last question. I have a couple,
actually. So when we're looking at the proposal to increase the transparency and inclusion, when you're talking about the staff reports, you're not asking for the individual staff member's name who wrote the report, right?
Well, it's on the top of the report. So I don't need to ask for it. It's there.
Okay, because I mean, listening through it, I was hearing like who prepared the report, how did they, so I just didn't know if we were looking at a list of names or if it was just, again, just
No,
finance
and
departments.
I think your point, Brian, is a good one, that this is something that applies to a lot of city staff because a lot of staff members write reports.
Yeah, and so it's, if we're looking at just like I said, as an example, the finance department, or, I mean, there could be
Any department.
any number of people in the finance department that assisted with that. And I don't want to see the staff reports get extra long. They're long enough as it is. And the only other tweak, it's not really a tweak. It's just on the last slide. I think that on that recommendation for the motion would actually be flipped. That's just the request the council to agendize and then to approve the SEJC diversity and inclusion or the inclusivity statements on the agendized item that they had. So yeah, it looks really, really good. That was the only issues I had. I just didn't want to see an extra long staff report with several names.
I like this stuff very much. And I just have couple of small comments. In terms of protected groups, ordinarily religion included. But I think also, we might want to think, I'm not sure how to phrase this, but citizenship. But I don't want to say that, what I want to say is people should not be penalized because they're non-citizens. So I don't, whether it's citizen status or what they.
Immigration status.
Residency, whatever that, the term of art is for that. And then on the template, which I like very much, the only thing I would add is when we identify what groups are impacted, I think we also should say, and how. And how, if a particular group is impacted, are they disadvantaged? In what way are they disadvantaged? That may seem to be obvious, but it isn't always. So I think if we identify a group that's at a disadvantage, we should say in what way, whether they've been excluded, whether they will be hurt in some direct way by this policy. Okay? Otherwise, it's cool. We need a motion, and then we can get public comment. Anyone want to make the motion? Actually, yeah.
I'm going to defer to Brian. He wanted to flip it, so go ahead.
All right, I move that the Social and Economic Justice Commission requests that the City Council agendize this item, and that the council, that the SEJC recommends that the council approve the inclusivity statements on each staff report presented to the city council. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's same thing as, yes. Second? Yeah. Okay, public participation, anyone from the public want to weigh in on this?
I have a question. So this is a process, right? So this is step one, because at some point you're going to get to doing something about it?
We can't directly require anything. We make recommendations to council, that's all we can do.
But are you going to recommend that they do something?
That's what we're doing.
This just seems like more paperwork, and people that have to do paperwork will just do it rotely and it won't go anywhere. So I just wanted to clarify this is step one. And, okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I think.
I'm pretty sure we're saying the same thing. I think obviously we, and Chair Grossman is correct, that all we can do is recommend the council. Our hope is if the staff reports are created, that then we'll have a process on SEJC, that not only will that be of help to the council, as the existing sustainability reports are of help to council, and just reminding them and keeping it in front of their minds, but that it also will then lead to a process on SEJC, being able to go through and to have a kind of review, comment within SEJC, and potentially if there are issues that come up, report back to council on issues that, on how this is functioning, and also what kind of issues it raises.
I would agree. I think we would want to follow these and see how they're done and whether in fact they're useful, and if they're not, why not?
And if they're raising broader issues that we can take into account right now, we talked about on the commission, the difficulty of engaging with, not the difficulty, but that just building processes where we can engage with the council agenda. In this case, it's after the fact. We'll see what they've done to build in a process that allows for engagement.
I really like the idea of this, but I have a similar question to Susan. I hope that there's a lot more that will come after this. The examples you gave, the three examples you gave, they didn't quite fit in with your original. Isabel, would it be possible to go back to when there's a description early on.
Template?
Yeah, the template, okay. So, and that and building up to the template was saying, how did we find out about this problem? Was it from the public? Was it from, a concern that we have in the community? And so I'm not sure that your examples feel like, and maybe this is what Bart was referring to too, it feels like it leaves that out, because sometimes a problem, something comes up and it's addressed because somebody brings it up, and sometimes it's not addressed, or it's addressed in a wrong way because it's brought up in a way that actually is going to impact people in the wrong way. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of ramifications of considering inclusivity, and I think that I think this is a great start, but I still feel like there should be some sort of training manual or something that goes along with it, some sort of way, a PowerPoint 10-step lesson that everybody, city council member has to go through, or something to teach you how to be aware. Because if you don't know, how do you know that you don't know? And I just think that's a huge issue when you're talking about inclusivity. You don't, for example, almost everybody on SEJC and probably the city council and everybody in this room keeps saying "you guys." Like that's not an inclusive statement. You guys is not a good statement, or that's crazy. That's another non-inclusive statement. But we don't know that if we aren't taught that. So heightening awareness, I guess, to help people really engage with this idea, because we want people to be their awareness to be heightened, because I think it's what makes for a more inclusive city. And then also I think that if people in the city feel included, they might be, maybe, more likely to come to meetings like this and city council meetings, because they hear about their lives, they hear people acknowledging their lives, they hear people recognizing their challenges and putting it into words that are getting out there. So all of that, I think, needs to be done. I think this is a great step, but I think it could very well lead to somebody just sort of rotely going through and tapping in names and not really thinking. And part of it, I think, is, Bart, your point about, if it's not, who's it impacting and why is it impacting them? Or who is it not impacting and why isn't it impacting, would be the other half of that. So kind of the negative space of this. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Any other comments? Bring it back to the commission. We have a motion, and we have a second. Are you ready to vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Unanimously passed. Thank you very much. Now we move on to,
The second, from our subcommittee.
yes, that's what I mean.
Okay. Thanks, and I think Isabel has it up. So the second thing that Judy and I had said on the subcommittee as a goal for the summer fall, she has successfully shepherded the first through. So the second thing that we had said was the idea of floating and hopefully moving along on a question that we have both been interested in, which is establishing a system of creating publicly accessible and visible reports on diversity. And so given both the sort of ranging responses to the July meeting, which I wasn't able to attend because I was out of town, and also our awareness of concerns about how this would be done and the kinds of work that it might create, what we have here is a step behind what Judy presented on inclusivity, which is a kind of outline of what some of the potential possibilities, issues, available data, and to kind of give the commission a chance to help us shape a recommendation, suggestion, possibly for next meeting, that commissioners would feel ready to get behind and send to council if that's their will. So if you could go forward, Bill, thank you. So first, just a general sense of what are diversity reports. There are different names for these in different institutions, but you can find, both Judy and I and others found wide ranges of different types, both public and private agencies, organizations, that just provide a baseline of data for asking whether the organizations reflect, or in what ways the organizations reflect the diversity of the communities they're based in or work with. They often measure general demographic data based on gender and race ethnicity, but depending on the organization of the data they have, they can include many other measures of diversity, income, sexuality, age, religion, disabilities, housing status, certainly in certain circumstances will include questions on residence. If you can go ahead. There are, whenever you're thinking about what a diversity report is or can be or how it can work, there are a handful of sort of front questions that it's natural to have. One of which is what data is available, and especially in a situation like this. Is it possible to conceive of a report, or at least the beginning stage of a report, that wouldn't create an undue burden upon staff? A second question, if that's a practical question, a more abstract question, is how do we actually define diversity? Many of the terms have contested meanings, and some of this also relates back to number one, that some we might design an instrument of our own choosing with a certain set of terms. We might find that data that's already reported out to different federal agencies especially have a preset by the federal government set of terms. How do we wrestle with that? Which forms of diversity do we measure? Which communities, that's both sort of the demographics and also how we define the communities, the residents of Albany, is it Contra Costa Alameda counties, is it people who utilize certain services? And then the fourth question that often surfaces with these is that, once a report is generated, what becomes of it? And that's certainly a very important question, though I think that, there can be, that can be one that in some ways can arise organically once we start to see what the reports generate. You can go ahead, Isabel. But the first thing that Judy and I developed, and especially Judy was especially good at getting information from very helpful city staff, as well as finding information reported out, was how much of this information, of a certain baseline of information, is already available, and that it might assure either commission or council or staff concerns that this would create an undue amount of work. The city files, the E4 reports, the city staff was good enough to share with Judy and I the detail, racial, ethnic, and gender makeup of the city's employees based on the EEO guidelines, which might not be exactly the terms that we would all choose, but as part of the city's reporting relationship with higher level governments. So this is a chart on gender, which shows the following data. We'll have some graphs that also come back to this that we already report out. There's also, if you can go ahead, Isabel, we report out information based on city staff on race and ethnicity. Now, as you can see, there's complications of race and ethnicity in terms of federal designations of how to treat Latinx, Hispanic, people of Hispanic descent as a race or as an ethnicity. So you get multiple reporting based on federal guidelines. But as long as we know what we're dealing with, these stats are available and reported by the city. Go ahead, Isabel. For city residents, the Census Bureau, of course, produces a large amount of data, not only on the decennial census, but on community surveys that are continuously updated. And so, G reported this information in 2013 to 17 ACS survey of Albany, California, which gives here, unfortunately, not exactly similar because of some distinctions in how, in my understanding, how Latinx is treated in the two, in EEO versus the census, which is hard for the city of Albany to control. But the reporting out on both gender and race ethnicity. And so then if we can click forward one more time, you can see here that sort of simple charts of available information would allow us to look at for 2011, which is on the left, and 2019, which is on the right. This is broken down by the gender reporting of a comparison of city employee demographics and of citywide resident demographics. And if you can click forward again, as well. Thank you. And this similarly is based on interracial categories, the reporting outward. Essentially, our hope is that this kind of data would basically allow us to assess as a city, where we are. It's a sort of starting point. There's a lot more information that we might want to have. But what does our city as tools that we can easily use. Go ahead, Isabel. So essentially what we're asking is, kind of reflecting on asking SEJC to help our subcommittee think about next steps that might reflect any sort of concerns, enthusiasms that you have in hopes of drawing up a request for a motion in a future meeting. We could consider as a commission calling for a diversity report that simply begins, as this does, by utilizing available and already collected demographic data, given its own limitations, but also given the practical utility of beginning with things that already exist, to produce a simple report, beginning with city employees of the city's own demographics. This is in many ways an imperfect tool, as we point out, that it's stuck within the definitions and the data provided. It doesn't address some other things that we might want to add on later on, but it doesn't, of course, preclude us from adding that on later on as we think about clients of city services and how they reflect and don't reflect broad residential numbers, or the complexity of how race and ethnicity is defined and measured on different tools. But the upsides is that this would be feasible, fast, it wouldn't require a lot of work, and it can be easily posted and disseminated. And we can see as a way of simply making the data available. What happens after that, which is something that often raises one set of anxieties about this is the work required, and other is, well, what will it mean? And I think that getting the data will allow us to assess that question. I don't think we designed this with a sense of therefore this will lead to outcome X. This will lead to data that we and council and hopefully the city community will utilize to say, oh, in these ways, we're actually doing better than we think at meeting at reflecting our community. In these ways, we're not. This is widely circulated. And potentially, in reflection of the downside of it not measuring everything we like, if we can show that this can be done based on available information in this sort of smaller defined way, it could be a springboard for us developing more complex and tailored tools for other measurements that we might want to take, but that aren't as easily available.
Okay. Comments, questions, thoughts?
Who wants to go first?
Well, I want to thank you for all your work on both of these proposals. It's really good work, and I appreciate it. I think just getting the information out there is really the first step, right? So, and then see what happens from there. So I think I'm with you.
All right, I guess I'll dive in. So how would the report look different from what you have currently? So you have comparisons from 2019 from the Census Bureau. How would we get more information?
Well,
Because then that's going to lead me
I
into my
think one of
next.
the things that we had talked about, Greg, jump in here if you have any other thoughts, but one of the things we had talked about, which is a much broader presentation of information about participation in city programs, having a day in whatever month we decided where city staff would count all the kids in city-based programs and do an assessment of their ethnicity and the groups that they, so what we've presented here is a very, very pared down proposal of that, and I think the point is that we need to know if you think this is worth even taking the pared down step, or whether it could be, I think in my reviewing things, the city of Boston, which we're nowhere near the size of the city of Boston. The city of Boston has this amazingly comprehensive diversity report card that looks at just about every aspect of the way you can look at groups of people and participation. Does that answer your question?
My concern is that we have declared ourselves a sanctuary city, and I am very concerned that any staff member of the city, whether that be city staff and recreation, City Hall, and specifically the police department, tries to define ethnicity, or anything else that could potentially threaten their employment with the city of Albany and open the city to liability.
Give me an example.
Well, as a sanctuary city, we are not supposed to ask somebody their ethnicity, their place of origin or birth. That's not something we're supposed to be doing, and that could potentially.
I don't understand that. 'Cause
That's the whole idea behind sanctuary cities: is you don't ask where somebody is from.
I thought the idea was you didn't discriminate
That's
against.
right.
Well, but part of that is not referencing to where somebody is from. So as somebody from the police department cannot go ask somebody if they are a legal citizen,
Yeah.
Okay. I
right?
get that.
So that then it becomes a slippery slope when you start to ask ethnicity questions from the police department. You know what I'm saying? So,
But isn't it better to ask instead of the person to guess or not? I mean, I'm really having a hard time, like.
I think one of the things that might help Brian with this.
in a perfect world, it is better to ask, but that also can become problematic.
Yeah, I think Brian's clear about his concern.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, if I may, Brian, I think one of the things that helps me put this in context, because I understand that concern, we are already reporting EEO4, equal opportunity data. We're already tonight reviewed data from one of the services that is provided by the city with self-reported ethnicity. So we're already kind of in that mix, and I think maybe we have to figure out how we can do that in a way that doesn't feel like a violation of a sanctuary.
Yeah, that's my only concern, is that we do it in a way that, especially when it comes to, like, again, like what you were saying with programs that minor children are involved in, we might have to get some type of waiver or parental agreement before. I mean, because that could be, if city staff just goes in and starts counting people and assuming, or starts asking children, what's your ethnicity, that could become a real issue.
And I think for me, I'm thinking of kind of stages. And honestly, I think the first stage could almost literally be a certainly more professionally done by our highly qualified staff version of what Judy with staff know and I put together here. I mean, in other words, I don't think that that we have to start by reinventing the wheel.
No,
Start
exactly.
with basic information that gets out and is easily available on the website, things that we already collect. And I do think that as, my hope would be personally, that would create momentum to think about other information that we could start adding on to. Certainly, I can't imagine that we'll get to the level of a city the size and complexity of Boston, but that we'll be able to layer on, other information that will allow us to see the city from more facets, not quite 360. But I can easily accept that in the process of, as we think through those stages, if we have this and then think about how to improve upon it, there are going to be, certainly involving law enforcement, certainly involving minors, potentially involving other, people who might be giving information, thinking it's to the city but not wanting to report it out.
Yeah.
That we'll have to be thoughtful on power and consent in all of those circumstances. And so there might be some pieces of information that we have to decide either we have but we're not going to publish, or we could get but we'd be better off not to get in, or we can't get. And I don't expect us to ever end up with everything. But I'm interested in thinking about whether there's interest in the commission of figuring out how to create a starting block, the kind of foundation we'll later start building on.
Yeah. Do you know if there's any other sanctuary cities that have diversity reports? And
The city of Boston is the same. I mean, but I'm not sure whether they're involved with police.
obviously something we have to look into. I want to go back to the beginning, the question you asked initially, is this useful? I think it's useful. I think that the city, has had the term inclusivity on its strategic plan for a long time without any clarity about what it means or what we're trying to do about it, or what the issues are. Are we inclusive? Where are we inclusive? Where are we not inclusive? Before you can create solutions, you have to understand the problem, and we don't. So I think that's very useful. I think there are some obvious problems we're going to have to struggle with. The categories are much too limited, specifically when it comes to identity. Even the Census Bureau has opened up a little bit in terms of multiple ethnicities and things of that sort. So I think we need to begin by laying out what we think would be ideal, and then we may have to settle for the fact that in some instances we don't know everything. But to just have male and female, for example, is problematic, and won't be really helpful in the long run if that's what we hold to. So yes, I think we need to do this, and I think there's a lot of more work to do. But I also do agree that we don't have good pictures of who is using services. We don't have good pictures of even what the population looks like, except in very vague ways. So I would support doing more work on this, and I think we all have to contribute. I don't think the two of you can be expected to do this entirely on your own, but I think it's worth the effort.
I guess for me, the question, so certainly, Julie should respond on her own, but certainly, we engage with the question of the ideal. Our fear is, that we devise an ideal measure that does nothing. So certainly neither of us would have selected this.
Right.
Both of us feel like if we don't get something out there, there's never going to be anything. And so devising the ideal measurement that would satisfy all of our requirements but never happen is something that I do worry about, and I would hate to have the perfect be the enemy of a starting place.
Well, I think you need
The
both.
city's reporting nothing.
I think you need both. I think you need to say this is what we know now, but this is what we would like to know.
Sure.
Because if you put out this the way it is, for example, I think that the reaction would be so negative that it wouldn't be particularly helpful, because people would feel that they were ignored, categorically. So, I think we have to be careful about not presenting something that many people will feel is not meaningful.
That sounds very reasonable. I guess we'll continue to work on this. I don't know that we've had public comment on it.
No, we haven't.
Yeah.
So, public comment.
This is going to be hard to say, and I say it in all due respect. I'm saying it as a white, privileged male. I've been reading a lot more about this, about our society and our bureaucracies and so on. And I read a book called White Fragility, which is quite good. I recommend it. And one of the things she points out is that a discussion like this is such a good example of a white person's in power kind of mentality, with all the bureaucracy we're talking about, all the detail and so on. And I don't say that out of disrespect, because I'm not sure what I could recommend or suggest, but a little bit picking up on what Bart was saying, I think we need to think beyond what we've all grown up with and feel comfortable with about how we solve things as white people, and how if we're going to deal with diversity, the diversity in our community, we may have to approach it in a different way. And I wish I could give you a more specific idea, but this has really affected me, and I think a lot about it. And there's a lot more discussion going on in the country about it, but I think it's very germane to what you're talking about right now, and the approach we take should consider it somehow. Thanks.
I want to thank both of you for both of the things tonight, the diversity and the inclusivity. I think this is a good beginning. I was really glad that Bart said what he said, because that was my first thought too, is I don't care what categories they choose, you need to have ones that represent what you really believe, and you don't believe that everybody's so easily divided. Obviously, not everybody identifies as male or female, et cetera. So I think that that's really important in what comes out. I also think it's important to answer the question that you asked at the beginning as what will you do with it? Because I think jumping into something, or not jumping in, but moving into something where you're looking at the diversity, I think you need to know that you'll take action of some kind, that you're thinking about action. I think there should be action. I just wrote an article for something about this very thing, about evaluating inclusivity and diversity. And if you don't then do something with it, it actually can cause more damage than not doing it at all, because people are saying, well, now you know, but what are you going to do? And then my third point is that I see that you're comparing the makeup of the city to the makeup of the employees, for example, and I can't remember if it included the commissions and the city council. Did it? It's just employees, right?
No, we only had,
Yeah, so I think that would, yeah, so that would be good to look at the amazing whiteness of all of the parts of Albany. But I also think it's very important to emphasize that it doesn't really matter. If this were a city that was 99% white, it would still be important to have diversity. So it shouldn't just be seen as a mirror. It should also be a mirror of our community. It should be a mirror of the world, because that's how you get diverse views, and that's why diversity is so important, because not everybody's coming from the same place. So anyway, I just think that be careful not to emphasize that we're trying to reflect something. But I really appreciate this as a beginning, and I would love to, I mean, my solution is to go back to the slide of employees and just say, for the next 25 years, don't hire any white people, and you'll solve a lot of the problems you've got already, a lot of the problems. And don't have any new white people on commissions or whatever. No more white people for a while. Oh, and then the other thing I just want to say is, if you got into a situation where you're observing, you can't tell by looking at somebody what their ethnicity or race is, and you probably already know that, but I just want to point it out that if you've never taken the PBS race sorting quiz, I would encourage you to do that, because it's very humbling. So if you did get to a situation where you wanted to know who was attending, you would have to ask people, because you wouldn't be able to tell. Thank you.
Is this helpful? So did you want to? No. So, do you have what you need for the moment?
I'm not sure, in the sense that I'm not sure, I can see the utility both, but essentially when we began, I think we began with some trepidation that almost nothing that we could do would actually happen because of the fear of creating work and creating a system that would create such a burden that it would immediately die. And so, I defer to other people's judgments about the possible, but I am sort of torn between the sense of better a wedge than a beam, get in something that we feel like we can absolutely say can happen without a great deal of work and create a baseline we can build on, or let's create a perfect instrument that we know will create an enormous amount of work that I would be for, but I would have to defer to you all's judgment about whether or not we each got feedback that something that was presented as creating a large amount of work for staffing and resources could well be a non-starter. So I'm going to have to defer to your all's judgment on the path to follow there, but I don't feel like I have a clear sense of how to balance those two goals.
It occurs to me that if we could lay out just a little bit more specifically what the work is that needs to be done, we might, for example, invite the city manager to come and talk with us about it, and what pros and cons does she see, and we might also talk to some members of the city council as to what they would do with that information. So, I mean, we don't have to guess. We can see what the commitment is.
I guess I want to echo a little bit of Greg's concern. going forward. We're a small commission. We're still 5 people. We have 3 subcommittees that we're trying to support, and we have an inclusivity motion going forward to the council. We could do a couple years of inclusivity report review and see where that takes us, and leave the challenges and the opportunities of a diversity report for a future commission or a larger expanded commission, or more public participation, or the elimination of white people from the planet, or whatever it would take to create a report that was acceptable to the community at large. I really think that we need to consider the workload that we've bitten off, and whether we have enough going forward to put this on the shelf for a while.
Can I guess I'm missing what the burden would be. I mean, would this report be, how would this report present itself? Is what I guess what I'm saying is, would this be an annual report? Would this be
Our vision, I think, was that since some of these reporting outs are annual, if we were to begin with available data, it could be, I mean, it depends on how you design it, right? If you're designing it, how do we make sure that the data that we have that is collected but mostly kept internal becomes external? Then you could design an annual process in which you sort of essentially make public what you have collected, and which is not private or confidential, but you make that public in an accessible manner. Obviously, the more complex measurements you're looking at, which would accomplish a lot more, you might well decide that if, that some of these might be so demanding that they should only be done on a 2-year cycle or a 5-year cycle or something. It would really depend on, what kind of will there was in council and staff for authorizing the time that it would take to create those additional measures. Does that answer your question?
yeah, I'm just, if it's something as simple as the graph that you created,
That's minimal work.
I mean, that's the minimal work, but if that's something that can easily be done by city staff, using existing data that we don't have to mine from wherever, I don't see there's a problem of having that report public. That
It's public now.
it's public, but I'm saying on a consistent basis. It might be a good stepping stone. It might be a good beginning. But I don't think there's any reason not to have that information, which is not proprietary, it's not confidential, in the public. And it could be something very simple as that. I don't know how complex we want to make it, or what I think the key is kind of what was said. What action is going to be taken on this? And obviously, we can't take any action. We simply advise the city council who takes the action. And it's up to their will to decide if they want to or do something with this or not. But I think you can simply put forth the data that we currently have in some form and say that this is a good stepping stone and a good starting point.
I'm in favor of that, too. I think we should do it, get the information. I feel like there's this really pervasive racism going on in this country right now, and a lot of it's hidden, and I don't think we can say that it's not going on in Albany, but I just think given the situation in the country and our world, I don't think we could start soon enough to do it. That's how I feel.
So essentially, as I see it, the issue is that, or one issue is that, many people, feel that we would design, I think like probably all of us feel like we would design these things entirely differently. We're uncomfortable with the ways that the measurement tools that we have. On the other hand, we face then the issue is it's better not to be publicly broadcasting information that exists in order to save ourselves from feeling the responsibility of putting out information that we wouldn't have designed.
Yeah.
We can put out what exists and also articulate how we think we can build systems to do better. But I find it harder to think that it's better not to put this information out in order to prevent, in order to save ourselves from critique. I would rather be critiqued and have the information out there than not have the information out there in order to protect my sense that I haven't done anything beyond critique.
Yeah.
If in fact it's information. I mean, if the categories are not meaningful, then the information may not be meaningful. And so then putting it out may not help anybody to do anything. I mean, this is complicated, and a lot of things running through my brain that I don't think I can say in 30 seconds. I think maybe we need to continue this discussion. And I don't think there's any rush. And I think we want to do this right. And I don't want to put it all on the two of you. I think we all have to play a role in it. And I think that we do need to begin really with a conversation about why are we doing this? What's the outcome that we want to see? And it's not just a lockstep of, we have 30% of this population, so 30% of council should, I don't think we want to think in that kind of simplistic way, but we need a better picture of ourselves. And we need to think about where we're failing in terms of outreach. But I think maybe the thing we should do is all go home and think about this a little bit and talk about it next month some more until we come to a place where we feel comfortable. We have one more quick item. In terms of the Housing Subcommittee, which used to be me, but Judy and I have met. Judy had some concerns and has graciously agreed to serve with me on the Housing Subcommittee. But we need your approval to do that. To set up the Housing Subcommittee, and also, and I'm just speaking for myself, but we did talk to Mayor Mason, who was interested in this. One of the things we discussed was the notion of doing a forum sometime this year on housing. We would invite in the community and we would talk about what are our housing needs in Albany, what are the problems that exist, what are the potentials that might exist, where we might bring in some local experts on the field of housing development. We obviously have some, including the president of SAHA, who lives here. And so we're asking for your blessing to be a subcommittee and for that to be one of our tasks.
That sounds like a great idea.
I know that, the two of you were great, but Julie Winkelstein had expressed a desire to be on the subcommittee, and we did get a policy for adding people that are not on the commission. That was a couple of meetings ago.
We did, and the way we've worked that out is basically we've said to the subcommittees that they can decide if they want to recommend that somebody
Okay.
be included.
All right.
So we haven't
you guys-
talked
right.
about that
Okay.
at all. And sometimes it may be more a question of inviting somebody to talk with us rather than to do it permanently, because it does create some handicaps.
Right, okay.
So can I have a motion? Well, let me make the motion that we appoint Judy Kerr and myself as the subcommittee, and that one of our tasks be the creation of a Housing 4.
It seems appropriate that I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none, passes. And I think that's the end of our agenda for this evening. We have 5 minutes here. Does anybody want to mention anything that they want to make sure is on the agenda for next time?
The aging in place.
You'll be ready?
Yes.
And I think, I'm hoping to have a meeting with the city of Berkeley next week to discuss some things, how they worked out their program. I'm still waiting to hear back from Fremont. I'm not sure I'll be able to do that, but I think we're going to need to look at, those are two major cities, and how we can adapt, being considerably smaller, how can we adapt the policies and whatnot that they've created for a city our size. That's going to be, I think, one of the biggest struggles is how to adapt. It's a very huge issue, and how to. I think we have a good step with a very good senior center, and I think they're going to be on the forefront of this process. I mean, that's how it seems in the cities in Berkeley and Fremont, that it's kind of controlled under their division of seniors.
So aging in place. Isabel, do we have anything else? For next time?
Diversity report,
Yeah,
continuing
we'll
that
continue this
item.
conversation.
And so far, that's all we have, but we'll be in touch.
And I just had a question for Isabel. When is the SEJC scheduled to report to council? Can we anticipate that the inclusivity would be at that time?
Which one?
Does SEJC have a scheduled reporting to council, or this would be
Not at this time, no.
agendized separately? Okay.
The agenda. We also haven't yet had an agenda date set for the recommendation we made on increasing the membership. But hopefully that will happen soon, Isabel. All right, well, thank you all very much. And that's it. Good night.